Okay, so I have my own book, or your own book of campcraft here. It was printed in 1950 first. This is a reprint. It was printed in 73. I've had this since I was a kid. I bought it used at a thrift store. It cost only 30 or 95 cents originally in the 70s. And you can, it's got all kinds of interesting information. It's more of a kid's book, but it's got a little bit of everything in it. And it's actually a handy little manual. The thing I use most, though, it opens up right to my page, is what they're called bread twists or doughboys, which is basically your basic bannock recipe or your basic biscuit recipe. Now I've adapted it slightly. You can see I wrote in there that I like to add a teaspoon of sugar or honey to the recipe. The other thing that also works really well is rather than just adding your quarter cup of water, if you use a water yeast mixture or if you use beer, you're going to end up with a less heavy bread and it's going to be a little fluffier and nicer. Now you can cook this over a fire, you can bake it, you can fry it. It's very diverse. I doubled this up. As you can see, it's a one-person recipe, and I'm making this for my wife and for I. I'll show you how this ends up. Okay, so I'm making 4 times the recipe here. So it calls for a half cup of flour, so I put 2 cups. That's 4 times the amount. I also need some baking soda. We're just using Compliments brand. Something I wanted to show you though is this handy little measuring spoon by KitchenAid, or Kitchen Arts, I'm sorry. I'm not sure, my wife probably bought this somewhere. The nice thing is you can move this up and it gives you a bunch of different measurements all in one measuring spoon. For dry ingredients, this works awesome. It does have a little rubber in there, so it works for wet stuff too. A little gets by, but it's just an awesome little tool. Kitchen Art. Handy tool. So I'm going to add 4 times the baking powder. We'll put some shortening, some salt, and that's about it. This is the most basic recipe ever. I'll put a little sugar, and yeah, we'll mix in some beer and give it a little bit of lightness to our bread, and we'll show you how this works. One other thing I'm going to add to this as well that's not in the recipe in the book here. I want to kind of make this an herb bread a little bit. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a shake of garlic in there. I'm going to add some parsley flakes, more just to add some color to it. Make this bread nice and colorful. Parsley I don't find you get as much flavor out of, but it is nice for color. The dried parsley at least. And then I'm going to also add some oregano. Just a little bit of a shake of each. Just enough to add a little bit of flavor to it. We'll mix that all in while it's dry. We'll mix all our dry ingredients together. And then the only other thing they asked me to add here was a teaspoon of shortening, which I'll do 4 because I'm doing 4 times the recipe. But rather than shortening today, I am going to use something different. So I told you I'd use something different than the shortening. This is actually very fresh. This is bacon grease from this morning. I know it probably doesn't look that appetizing sitting here in the dirty pan, but it's still good. It's only a couple hours old. You can store your bacon grease longer term if you want. It will go sour and bad, but I'm going to use this in this recipe rather than the shortening, just to add some more flavor to our bread. You will find it makes a big difference, and I have plenty here to do for the bread. Okay, so I have my dry stuff here, the bread, the bread dough ingredients mixed in with my herbs, and then here I have a mix. This is a little bit of beer plus some yeast and some water. And this is just going to make it rise a little nicer. If I just put straight water, it's strictly going to be a flat bread. There will be no rising to it. So there's my dough all mixed up. I'll make it out and I'll show you what it looks like after that. As you can see, I start my bread off first in the cast iron. I do it up to where it's kind of browned on both sides. And then I'm just going to throw it in the toaster oven just to finish it off. I could finish it in the cast iron by putting the lid on it as well. But for the sake of speed, I'm making supper for my wife and I'm going to throw it in the toaster oven, finish it off, make it a little faster. So here's my bread now that it's done. I stuffed these. This one kind of stuck to the pan so you can see it. I stuffed them with some cheese and ham. And plus the herbs, baked them in the oven. Now we have some bread ready to eat for supper. That's how I do it. Thanks for watching.